في القلب شعاع يهديني نور الإيمان سرى فيني.
In 1187, Salahudeen was able to reunify the Muslim world, unifying the states of Syria, Mosul, Aleppo, Damascus, and of course Egypt that had been under his control since 1169, since the early days of Nur-ad-Din's reign. Now, this was a matter of big concern for the Crusaders, for even the Crusader chroniclers, William of Tyre, one being an example of, who lived at the time of the Crusades and even worked for the Count of Tripoli, and who even worked for the Crusaders themselves. William of Tyre mentions in his book, mentions in his accounts and in his reports, that Salahudeen was a man that the Crusaders were scared of, because they were suspicious of any sort of ascension that Salahudeen had, for he was a man that was known to be brave, wise in war, wise in counsel, and someone that was known to be generous beyond measure. This is a Crusader saying this. This is a Christian saying this. Not one of the Muslim accounts, but this is one of the Christian accounts that are saying this. So, when in 1186, Reynold of Chatillon breaks that truce, the Crusaders are now ready and anticipating an attack from Salahudeen. Salahudeen knows this. Salahudeen knows that the Crusaders are anticipating an attack from him. Yet that does not deter him. In January 1187, he starts his plans to take over Jerusalem. And in essence, in that year is when we have the Battle of Hattin, a battle so great that Ibn al-Athīr mentions that it is one of after all the great early battles of Islam, from the Battle of Badr, the Battle of Uhud, the Battle of Yarmouk, the Battle of Qadisiyah, that took parts of the Roman Empire, that crushed the Persian Empire. Ibn al-Athīr mentioned that this battle was so important that there was no more battle important after the early great battle of Islam than the Battle of Hattin. So in January 1187, he calls upon his commanders, Badr ad-Din al-Duthrim, Qaymuz al-Najmi, and his commanders from all across the Muslim world. He calls upon all of them to gather a war council to decide what should the next steps be. Now, there are two options for Salahudeen. Either he meets the Crusaders in a big decisive battle, in which he can take the risk of either if he wins, then there is no stopping him from entering Jerusalem, or he take the safer approach with less risk, where he instead decides to raid certain cities, small raids, small incursions into Crusader territory. He speaks to his commanders. Some of his commanders prefer the latter, in which the small raids and the small incursions. Other commanders push for the big decisive battle. Salahudeen makes the decision, and he ensures that he sets the plans in place for a big decisive battle in 1187. And he reminds his commanders as he proclaims that a big decisive battle is the best way to go ahead. He proclaims, "O my commanders, do not fight for me, rather fight for the sake of Allah, fight for the sake of this Deen, fight for the sake of all the Muslims that have suffered in the last 100 years." So by June 1187, Salahudeen enacts his plan. Now this is where Salahudeen's military endeavor has been memorialized in history. For he understood fighting the Crusaders in a big decisive battle was very difficult, for he understood that the Christian charges was something that the Muslims had a big problem with. They had a very strong cavalry and a very strong infantry, the Christian Crusaders, for they had a very, very strong, powerful army. They had weaponry that could counter the Muslim army. So Salahudeen realized, I can't just go to them and fight them. He needs to come up with a plan to get them in a place where Salahudeen would have the advantage. So Salahudeen enacts his plan. The first part of his plan is to deal with a group called the Knights Templar. The Knights Templar are a very famous warrior group, warrior monks, in fact. These guys would fight in the day and pray at the night. They were essentially the SAS, or the Navy SEALs of today, how we have in the USA, how we would have in the UK, of elite soldier unit. These were who the Knight Templars were. They were an elite unit of soldiers. And in June 1187, there is a battle called the Battle of Cresson against the Knight Templars, and Salahudeen is able to defeat and destroy much of the Knight Templars regiment. Now, Gerard of Ritfort, who was the leader of the Knights Templar at this time, is able to run away from this battle and go seek help from the main Crusader army, who at this point in time is led by Guy of Lusignan, who is the king of Jerusalem. Now, despite, he is the king of Jerusalem, but he's not a very popular leader, as, factionalism had existed in the Crusader kingdom 10 years before. And the only reason why he was king was because he was the husband of Sibylla, the wife of the former king. Now, the Crusaders are stationed in a place called Sephoria. Now, Salahudeen knew that they were in a place called Safiria, in essentially what is modern day, northeast Palestine. Now, he realizes by engaging them in battle in a place that they know about wouldn't be a very good advantage to him. So he tries to entice the Crusaders towards a position that he favors. And this is again, part of his military strategy, and again shows the genius of Salahudeen. What he decides to do is that he decides to camp near a place called Tiberias, which is in northern Palestine. And the Lake Tiberias is often called as the Sea of Galilee. And there is a city of Tiberias that is stationed next to the sea. For behind Salahudeen is the sea, and in front of him is the land. And he takes the city of Tiberias, and this is a very good strategic move from him. He takes the city of Tiberias because in that city at this point in time lived the wife of Raymond of Tripoli. Raymond of Tripoli was one of the Crusader kings. And of course, the Crusaders, when they heard of this, that Salahudeen had taken over this place, the Crusaders were very worried. The Crusaders realized that they need to take back this city, for they can't allow one of the Crusaders' king's wives to be left under the control of the Muslims, the control of their enemies. So the Crusaders launched a war council with Guy of Lusignan, Raymond of Tripoli himself, Reynold of Chatillon, and Gerard of Ritford, the four main commanders of the Crusader army. And they have a debate. Do we march towards Tiberias, which is 25 kilometers east, in the blazing heat, which is June 1187, the blazing heat of the Middle East, in especially the armor that the Crusader armies were wearing? They used to wear metal armor, very heavy armor that, of course, along that route would be very, very difficult to walk in, especially with the lack of water supply. Guy of Lusignan, Reynold of Chatillon all said that, no, we need to go fight Salahudeen. We need to go towards Tiberias and go and fight him. Raymond of Tripoli, however, despite his wife being in that city, he understood, right? He had suspicion that maybe this is a trap that we're walking into, right? So even though it was his wife that was in Tiberias, he actually took the side of, no, we need to stay in our position. This is where we are most advantageous. But as Guy of Lusignan was the king, he took the final decision that he was going to march his army of nearly, approximately, according to some reports, about 27,000 soldiers, and take the 25-kilometer journey from Safiria to Tiberias. Now, little did they know that they should have listened to Raymond of Tripoli, for this was all within Salahudeen's plan. Salahudeen wanted to entice the Crusaders out of Safiria and into the area which is now Tiberias. So as the Crusaders now take this long, arduous journey with a lack of water supplies, and with the strong, with the very heavy armor that they are wearing, they take that journey. For about 3 days they are traveling in the blazing heat of the Middle Eastern sun. And they reached the valley of Turan, which was the nearest valley of where there was a water source. And Salahudeen knew that they would arrive there. So what he would do is that he would slowly order his soldiers to do slight incursions, slight attacks on the Crusader army as they were walking. So as they were walking through Turan to try and access the water sources, he would send his soldiers to send and archers to attack the Crusader camps. And he would do this slowly and surely. And even at the night time, when the Crusaders rested overnight in Turan, he would send his soldiers at night time to attack the Crusader camps. And in the next day, in late June 1187, the Crusader army are deteriorated. They're low in morale. They're extremely hot. Some have died of starvation. Some have died of thirst. And they realize that we need to get to another water source. So they finally reach the outskirts of a village called Hattin. And this is where the decisive battle will take place. This is where Salahudeen wanted the battle to take place. He closes off all of the water supplies from the Crusader armies. He has already taken the wells of Hattin. And the Crusaders have finally realized they have finally reached the trap of Salahudeen. So what Salahudeen does is he lights bushes of fire across the Crusader army. He is able to surround the Crusader army to make them even hotter, to make them even more thirsty and less energetic to go into battle. And this is where the Battle of Hattin takes place, where Salahudeen sends his army, sends his regiment, his right wing and his left wing into battle, and again to face the Christian charges. The Christians, despite the heat, despite the lack of thirst, still spur and fight. Why is that? It's because they believed that they had something called the Holy Cross with them. Now they believed that they had a part of the Holy Cross which Jesus supposedly had been crucified upon. As Muslims, we do not believe this, but this is what they believed. They believed that they had won the previous 20 battles because of this cross. In fact, this is they had a part of this cross during the first crusade when they first attacked Jerusalem. So this is why there was that fervor, there was that there was that motivation to attack the Muslims despite the conditions. So Salahudeen realized this, and he attacked the group of soldiers that were fighting, that were protecting the Holy Cross, because he realized if he took the Holy Cross, the battle would be over. But there was a very specialist unit called the Bishops of Lidda that protected this Holy Cross. For they were told that they would die for this part of the cross. So Salahudeen targeted this particular regiment, and after lots of fighting, he was able to take the Holy Cross. And this demoralized the Crusaders. And at that point, the Crusader army was essentially decimated, and was eventually, the battle was won. And Salahudeen, Imaduddin Isfahani mentions a story during the Battle of Hattin that Salahudeen, his commanders at this point in stage, the commanders of Salahudeen came to him and said, "We have won the battle, we have won the battle, we have won the battle." Salahudeen stood there and not a single smile on his face. And he's like, "No, the battle is not over yet." For he realized that the king's tent still had not fallen. For he realized if the king's tent had fallen, that's when the battle was over. So again, the commander was saying, "We have won, we have taken soldiers, we have taken prisoners of war." He says the battle is not over yet. And the battle was won only when Salahudeen saw that the red tent, the very, viewable tent of the king of Jerusalem, King of Jerusalem, had fallen. And that's when he realized the battle had been won. And Imaduddin Isfahani mentions how big of a battle this was. And he says that there were so many prisoners taken. There were so many prisoners of war taken that no one would have believed that anyone had died in this battle. Yet there were so many dead on the battlefield that no one would have believed that anyone had survived this battle. This is how many people and how much bloodshed was spilled on this day. And there is a very, very interesting story that Isfahani mentions after the battle, in which he records a conversation between Guy of Lissanon and Salahudeen. Salahudeen Guy of Lissanon enters Salahudeen's camp.
I drink water for what it is.
I did not give the cup to you.
No. No.
Now, in Arab hospitality, if you offer someone a glass of water, that means you have guaranteed them safety. Guy of Lissanon drinks from this water. And Guy of Lissanon, next to him is seated Reynold of Chatillon, the famous Reynold of Chatillon who had tried to conquer Mecca and desecrate the Prophet ﷺ's grave, and had raided pilgrims that were on their way to Hajj. And Guy of Lissanon hands this glass of water to Guy of Lissanon. And Guy of Lissanon, just as he's about to drink it, Salahudeen knocks the glass of water out of his hand. He then proclaims to everyone in the gathering, including Guy of Lissanon, he says to them, "I have not offered this man," i.e. Reynold of Chatillon, "I have not offered this man water." And it's in that instance that he fulfilled the oath that he had made multiple times before and killed Reynold of Chatillon with his own hand. He made it clear that he did not offer him that glass of water, rather it was Guy of Lissanon that offered him that glass of water, not him. And that gave him justification to execute the man that had caused so much fitna for the Muslim Ummah. And he then reassured Guy of Lissanon that, look, kings do not kill kings. And he let Guy of Lissanon go on the very basis that he would never ever fight the Muslims again. This was a conversation that was mentioned by Isfahani. But a more important story that was mentioned by Isfahani is that when the prisoners of war were taken, they were sectioned across all the soldiers. As a booty, the soldiers of the Muslim army were able to take weapons, people from the war. Now, there was this story of this old man that Isfahani mentions. He was known to be a faqih, a knowledgeable man. And he was given a slave. He was given one of the Crusader soldiers as a slave. And this Crusader soldier was a big, strong man, very strong Frankish man, right? And this old man made a declaration. He openly shouted out to the congregation, to all the people, and called out, said, "Is there anyone here that is going to trade this Frankish soldier for a pair of sandals. And look at what he says. Look at what he's saying here. The people were astounded as well, in the same way that I was astounded when I first heard this as well. Is that why would he trade a soldier, someone that could possibly, serve his family, plow his fields, do things for him for the rest of his life, and serve his children as well? Why would he trade him for a pair of sandals, old pair of sandals? Isfahani mentions that this man then said that I want people to remember this day. I want people when they read the history books, I want people to remember that the Crusaders were so worthless that an old man was willing to exchange one of them for a pair of sandals. This is the memorialization of history. This is the empowerment of our Muslim Ummah. And it is in that instance that Salahudeen, the path was opened up for him to go towards Jerusalem. There was no Crusader army to defend Jerusalem anymore. So between July and October 1187, he is able to reach Jerusalem. He takes a lot of cities along the way, and in the 27th of Rajab, he is able to take over. And after a long siege of Jerusalem and the defense by Balian of Iblis, who had escaped the battle, he had been able to take over Jerusalem. And this is something that's really, really important for us to remember. For as he entered Jerusalem, did they not remember the memories of the First Crusade? Did they not remember the memories of when Raymond of Aguilar said, what a wonderful sight to be seen, and that there was so much blood that it waded up into people's ankles? Did they not remember the stories of Folker of Chartres when they said babies were being crushed against the walls during the First Crusade? And when Ibn al-Athīr mentions nearly up to 70,000 people were killed. Salahudeen understood that this was not a day of revenge, this was not a day of retaliation, but this was, despite that, a day of mercy. For the justice of Islam dictates that we protect people, not kill them, not retaliate. Because he remembered the example of our Prophet ﷺ, and he remembered the example of Fath Makkah, the conquest and the opening of Makkah. For who had any reason to retaliate? Was it not the Muslims who did not, when as they entered Makkah, did they not see the place where the Quraysh put Bilal, placed Bilal on the burning hot sand and placed stones on top of him when they said Ahadun Ahad? Did they not remember a place where Ammar ibn Yasir's mother Sumaya was pierced through the heart by the spear of Abu Jahl? Did they not remember this? Yet the Prophet ﷺ entered Makkah in peace without bloodshed. And this is the memory that Salahudeen remembered, not the memories of the First Crusade, but the memories of what Prophet ﷺ had done many, many years before. And as he entered Jerusalem, there is another story mentioned about his generosity, that he allowed the Christians to leave the city if they liked. And there's a very, very interesting story that is mentioned by Ibn al-Shaddad, is that at this point in time when they were trying to purify Al-Quds, there was a Frankish woman that came crying to Salahudeen, for she had gone to her Frankish leaders, the Christian leaders, and they could not help her with this situation. She was crying to Salahudeen and said to Salahudeen, look, my baby, my newborn baby, my son has been taken away from me. What do I do? So, give him back to me. Salahudeen, when he heard this, he got out a bag of gold from his pouch and gave it to his soldiers and told his soldiers, listen, do not come back until you find the newborn, if you find this child of this woman. The soldiers were able to find this child just before he was about to be sold to the slave markets. And he was able to return him to his mother. And Ibn Shaddad mentions a story in which when the baby is returned to his mother, the mother is obviously crying of happiness, and Salahudeen is also crying with her. This is a man of mercy, this is a man of compassion. For Stanley Lane Poole, a Western historian, an English historian, he wrote a very famous book in 1898, one of the most famous Orientalists of Western history. He complains that he says in his book that if Salahudeen was known of one thing, if Salahudeen was known only for one thing, it would be enough to show him as a man of compassion. For it was in that day that Salahudeen taught the Christians the meaning of compassion. This is Stanley Lane Poole, a Western historian, saying this. And again, in the stories mentioned, numerous stories mention of Salahudeen's mercy, that he used to pay out of his own pocket to allow some of the Christians that could not afford the ransoms to leave Jerusalem. And he invited those Christians who wanted to stay in Jerusalem, they invited them back. And he allowed the Jewish people to return as well. And in one final instance, he did not forget his teacher. He did not forget Nuruddin. For back when Nuruddin was alive, back when he was in charge of Syria, Nuruddin made a mimbar in which the imam stands to provide the Jummah prayers. And he made a mimbar on the foresight that he will one day place this mimbar in Masjid al-Aqsa. And Salahudeen never forgot this. So he immediately ordered his soldiers to go get that mimbar from Damascus. And the soldiers brought it back, and he placed that mimbar in in Masjid al-Aqsa, fulfilling the mission that his mentor Nur-ad-Din had started and in which he finished. That is the story of Battle of Hattin, and that is the story of the liberation of Jerusalem.